So good afternoon to everyone. It's a pleasure to be here again this afternoon to host another of these Zoom meetings on topics that are so important related to, of course, our environment. It's important that we develop environmental awareness. The last time there was, the topic was on earthquakes. And this time it is about droughts. We hear a lot today about climate change and how that is impacting the environment, the weather, and everything around us, and how we must be aware and how to counteract what is basically happening. So welcome to all of you to this session that is going to be on drought awareness. And it is a public education outreach. As we know, we are getting less and less rainfall. And because of that, we are experiencing drought conditions. We have to look for ways of how we can counteract this drought situation that we are facing here in St. Kitts and Nevis. And of course, it's not just happening in St. Kitts and Nevis, it's happening all throughout the Caribbean and so on. So thank you very much. I want to welcome the media houses that are here. Let me see. Is there any media house here? Hello? Hello? I'm not hearing anyone.
We're hearing you though, we're hearing you.
Did you hear my introduction?
Yes, I did.
You did hear the introduction. Right, so is there any media house here?
They will be coming in subsequently.
They will be coming in subsequently. Okay, well, without further ado, Mr. Ngumba, I pronounce your name correctly, your surname?
Mr. Ngumba.
Mr. Ngumba. Okay, I got it correct. So we would want to start the ball rolling by asking Mr. Brian Dyer, who is the director of the Nevis Disaster Management Department, to give us some remarks. Mr. Dyer, good afternoon.
Hi, good afternoon all. Good afternoon, Lesroy.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon to our distinguished panel that is here this afternoon to discuss our hazard for this month, which is drought. As we are aware, drought is a perennial problem for us here on Nevis, as in the early days, we had suffered some issues with our distribution of water supply to our consumers. So with the shortage of rainfall compared to other Caribbean islands, the practice here on Nevis was to try and collect as much of the rainwater harvesting as possible. And that has been a practice that has proven well for the Nevisian public. Drought has been a perennial problem here on the island. It not only impacts the water flow to our consumers, but it also contributes to a rise in vector and vector-borne diseases and affects our health and has other socio-economic impacts. So this afternoon, it's a pleasure to be here and with our distinguished panelists, all local. So, you know, it's a big promotion here for us as we have our local experts who will bring in the information to the general public. So I want to thank them very much. And again, I want to say a special thank you to Mr. Jacob Ngumba and his communications unit for putting together a wonderful public awareness campaign that every month we'll be able to feature a hazard that has some direct and indirect impact on our public here in St. Kitts and Nevis and the wider Caribbean. Drought impacts has caused billions around the world. The United Nations have recognized that in 2021 alone, 24 countries were impacted by drought. And of the 24 countries, 1 million persons were impacted by starvation. So it's a problem that we hope to hear more from our experts on how we are able to solve these issues and our challenges as we go forward in the future, as we expect more variation in our climate and reduction in our rainfall patterns. And heat is another problem that we are dealing with as well. So I want to say a special thank you to our panelists, and we look forward to the information that will be disseminated here this afternoon. Thank you very much.
Mr. Dyer, thank you very much. And you sort of gave an overview of what we are here about what we are here to discuss this afternoon, the drought and the impact of drought, not only on vegetation, farmers, how it affects farmers, how it affects us as human beings, how it impacts our health, and all of that, and the measures that we can take to combat these drought conditions. So thank you very much, Mr. Dyer. I would now want to invite the Honorable Spencer Brand, who is a Minister of Government in the Nevis Island Administration, to bring us some remarks. Of course, government is important when it comes to things like these, because they're the ones that make policy, they make laws, and so on, that can impact the operations of people in the country. Honorable Spencer Brand, the floor is yours.
Can you go to the next presenter and come back? I'm working on that at the moment.
Okay, Mr. Brand is not here. Well, I'm going to invite no other than the man himself, Mr. Jacob, or what we call him, Jack Ngumba, who is going to give an overview of the session that we have today, drought awareness. Mr. Ngumba.
Yes, it's always a pleasure. Thank you, Mr. Lesroy Williams. We are on the second phase with the multiple hazards campaign. The first phase would have focused on the geological or physical hazards. And we had the heavy support from US Seismic, the regional body, from January through to April. And what was unique is that the connection they would have built, it kind of bridged the gap between the local persons and those regional bodies to a point where even the common man in the street was able to understand how the seismic unit will work and things of that nature. That is one of our goals, to demystify the knowledge that surrounds safety. So it does not only end at the level of the technocrats, but the common man can grasp it as well as understanding and being a part of it. So presently we are dealing with the climatological or hydrometeorological hazards. What we mean, we're referring to hazards such as drought, flood, droughts, excessive heats, hurricane, etc. And the regional body that's going to connect with us at this time is CMIH. Unfortunately, they couldn't make it for drought because the regional CARICOF meeting is taking place in Jamaica. So the participants who would have been with us today are presently on another session. So why this campaign? The main goal of it is to educate the general public on those hazards that can impact us, and for the common man to basically know what to do before, during, and after, as well as always being informed or updated on the recent status of that said hazard. The key behind this is to wipe out the hurricane-centric mindset where, okay, when the hurricane season is over, that is it. We have nothing more to worry till the next June. That isn't true. We have earthquake, we have landslide, and now we have drought. I believe none of us is pleased with the water rationing that usually takes place because of drought. And instead of being complacent, the question is, what should we do to better the situation? That is why we have such a great session. And we are pleased to have people from the agriculture department and water management as well, not to talk of the Met office from Senkit, who are the key experts for today to really brainstorm in the simplest of form key things that the general public should know. And I must take the time again to thank Mr. Brian Dyer, who is the director of the Navy's Disaster Management Office. He would have caught this vision from its onset, and that is why our mission statement emphasizes the need for such an education. So without much ado, I'll hand it over to Mr. Lesroy to continue the journey.
Right, thank you very much, Mr. Ngumba. Mr. Ngumba is the Deputy Director of the National Disaster Management Department over on our sister island in Nevis. So thank you very much for that overview. And you made it very, very clear, Mr. Ngumba, that we are dealing with comprehensive disaster management. It is not only, as you use the word, hurricane-centric. We do not only deal with hurricanes, but the disaster offices here in the Federation look at comprehensive disaster management, which includes not just hurricanes, but all other environmental hazards. And you mentioned a few of them. Drought is one of them. Of course, we can have flooding, and we can have earthquakes and all of that. So thank you very much for making that very, very clear to our listeners. I want to now invite Ms. Zoe Bendeito to present us with the bios of our presenters for today. Zoe. Are you there, Zoe?
Hi, I'm here. Sorry for that.
Okay.
One moment, please. Mr. Daniel Dixon hails from the village of Sandy Point. His early education started at the Sandy Point Primary School, and then he transitioned onto the Sandy Point High School, which is now known as the Charles E. Mills Secondary School. Immediately after high school, he enrolled for a 2-year program at the Clarence Fitzroy Burns College, where he graduated with an associate's degree in general studies. In May 2008, Mr. Dixon began working at the St. Kitts Met Office and recently celebrated a commendable 15 years within the service. He is currently employed as a meteorological officer. However, in 2016, his passion and dedication to the job motivated him to pursue a higher level education at the University of the West Indies, Cave Hill campus, Barbados. In 2020, he proudly graduated with a bachelor's degree in meteorology with a minor in earth science. In addition to becoming a certified meteorologist, Mr. Dixon successfully completed the Operational Aeronautical Forecasters course in 2021, which qualified him to be a trained forecaster. Presenting Mr. Daniel Dixon.
Good afternoon. I have a small presentation, so I'll share my screen. Am I able to share my screen now?
Yes.
So I'm General Dixon on behalf of the State Government Office. Just giving a brief presentation of drought awareness. What is a drought? A drought is characterized by a deficiency of rainfall over a long period of time. It affects a region's water supply. There are different types of droughts. Meteorological drought, which basically starts the other types of droughts. A meteorological drought is the deficit of rainfall from the north. A hydrological drought is a drought when you start to see a reduction in natural stream flow or the groundwater storage. And the agricultural drought is when the moisture levels in the soil are unable to sustain average crop yields. An example of the hydrological drought, this would have been a boat that would have been submerged underwater in a lake in Colorado. But as the water level subsided, the boat was rigged. This would be cornfield in Colorado as well. The aquifer was exhausted and there was an agricultural drought. So these are just examples of these two types of droughts. Currently, we are experiencing drought conditions, which is not normal. Every year during the dry season, we experience drought. But I was messing around with some of the figures for the past 15 years, and I realized that the past 3 months, the rainfall values are lower than the average which would be May, April, and March. The values are lower than the 15-year average. And currently, the rainfall from there stands at 17.5 millimeters, or 0.7 inches, which is pretty low. And we almost out of it. Going into the future, the hurricane season is fast approaching, and the hurricane season is basically responsible for our rainfall within the Caribbean. However, we anticipate either normal or slightly below normal hurricane season, which could also mean a slightly below normal rainfall for the region. One of the factors that would possibly reduce the rainfall and storm development would be the El Nino. The El Nino is a oceanic and atmospheric phenomena in the Pacific Ocean that affects weather across the world. And it is projected to be relatively strong by July and August. Normally, when we have an El Nino year, for a couple of years, you tend to see less hurricane activity because it brings stronger westerlies, which provides stronger westerlies are shear winds, which blow off the top of the storms, which prevent development. Hence, you see less storm activity. And since we are kind of uncertain as to how much rainfall we should anticipate, these are some water conservation practices. Clean vehicles with a bucket rather than with a hose. Normally, when you use a hose, you tend to waste a lot of water. Turn off the pipes when putting away dishes and scrubbing them out. I tend to see a few persons, they will be washing their dishes and then they start to put away the dishes, but the pipe is still running. Similarly, when people are scrubbing their teeth, they are scrubbing their teeth and water is running. That's water waste. We could also use recycled water to water gardens. A lot of persons tend to go to the pipe for a small, probably just wash hands quickly. They would turn on the pipe at full force. You could turn on the pipe just a little less and get the job done and save some water. We could use stored water instead of throwing them away. Normally, sometimes you realize the water pressure is running low. So you just catch some water and you put it up. You put it up just in case. And then when the water pressure returns to its full strength, people tend to throw the water. It's a very weird practice, but it's I'm encouraging persons to make use of the actual water. And we could also use catchment sources. Some persons, well, I'm not sure if it's a big thing in Singapore, but in Antigua and like the US Virgin Islands, people tend to fill their home cisterns, so they tend to catch some of the rainfall and recycle that water to use for their daily use. That is the end of my presentation. Hello? Y'all heard me?
Yes.
Just making sure. All right.
Mr. Dixon, that was your presentation, nothing else? I suppose he is finished. Is that correct, Mr. Ngumba?
Yes, I'm finished.
You are finished. Okay, thank you very much for your presentation. Mr. Dixon, thank you so much for sharing with us what is a drought, the different types of droughts, and some of the things that we can do to conserve water. You know, we waste a lot of water, and there are things that we can do to help the situation so that it will not be as impacting on us. It impacts us, yes, but we need to mitigate some of the impacts. So thank you very, very much. Our second presentation, I don't know if Zoe has the bios for the other presenters. So we're just going to introduce them and maybe they can tell us something about themselves since we do not have the written bios. But we have Mr. Floyd Robinson, and Mr. Robinson is he's the Director of Integrated Water Resources Management. And later on, we will introduce Mr. Randy Elliott, who is the Director of the Department of Agriculture in Nevis. So without further ado, we will invite Mr. Robinson to give his presentation. Welcome, Mr. Robinson.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon to everyone. As the Director of Integrated Water Resource Management, actually that's only here on the island of Nevis. Most folks in the Federation would know that when it comes to some of the utilities, we have separate utilities. So Nevis has its own water services, Nevis has its own department. I am the Director of Water Resource Management, and this unit was introduced just about 4 years ago as we are realizing that water management cannot be solely left up to the utilities. A number of cross-cutting, cross-sectional issues when it comes to water. In the past, you would look at development and then try to figure out how much water you need for those development. And what we are trying to do is to flip that script on its head and look at the amount of water that we do have and see if that amount of water can support all the different aspects of development. Quick textbook definition of water resource management is that it's a process that promotes the coordinated development and management of water, land, and related resources in order to maximize economic and social welfare in an equitable manner without compromising sustainability and vital ecosystems. That's a big mouthful, but it gives you an idea of how far-reaching the impact of water is. I think obviously instinctively we understand that in terms of, you know, there's a slogan that we use in the water business, that water is life. But the mechanisms to and the logistics necessary to meet those goals has always been the challenging thing in terms of water. Mr. Dyer made reference to the fact that we've been having some water rationing over here on the island, and the sickness has been enjoying some of that too. And as you mentioned, Mr. Leroy, is that even for the Caribbean. So that is nothing new when it comes to us. The amount of rainfall that we are getting obviously exacerbates the situation. Rainfall has fallen off as much as 25% over the last few years. And what we have to understand in terms of, especially over here in Nevis, most of our water comes from groundwater. So we have to drill wells to access that water table, extract water, distribute it throughout the island. St. Kitts has a similar situation, but they're more, 50% of their water is surface water. And so they're more susceptible to a drought than we are, because there's an immediate impact. The minute the rain stops falling, surface water starts suffering. Groundwater gives you a certain protection, there's a certain delay to the effect of drought on the groundwater source. And so we tend to be a little bit more resilient sometimes. But again, what we have seen with the lack of rainfall, which is the source of all water, is that our water table has fallen. And so we're not getting the amount of recharge we have gotten over the years. And additionally to development is increasing. I mean, every day a house is going up, there's population growth, there is push for agriculture. And so the system is under pressure in terms of development. And again, this is where water resource management is supposed to come in and try to find a balance for that type of thing. The list that was put up in terms of water conservation, you know, those are right, smack on target. The challenge is that we tend to just focus on those things around this time. I think this effort that we're making here this afternoon, focusing on drought, brings forth the point that this is not the only natural disaster. I think we were talking about, you know, hurricane season. We know that like the back of our hand, June to November. But there are other disasters that are out there lurking, and some of them overlap tremendously sometimes. And so this has to become, this conservation practice has to really become an everyday practice for us. We see habits change sometimes when there's a drought, we have to reach out to folks. And so we at Water Resources are really trying to ramp up our educational outreach to get our citizens to understand that this is a day-to-day practice. It's not just when you see the situation is. We tend to feel like when it rains and it could be used for water, or be careless with how we use the water. And that is something that we have to dispel. A couple other things that we have tried to do to mitigate our drought and dry periods is, as was mentioned earlier too, Mr. Dyer mentioned that when we were in the early days of water development, cisterns were a popular thing on Nevis, rainwater harvesting. And fortunately, as the water system improved, then those practices kind of declined. And we are now trying to get, again, citizens to understand that rainwater harvesting is not a throwback, it's not a retroactive kind of decision. You know, it is part of the whole process right now. We have to use every source that we possibly have. So rainwater harvesting, we talk about reuse and recycling water. One, the challenge we have now with the increase in agricultural production, again, is that a lot of the water on Nevis is potable water is what agriculture strives, farmers use. And so we are now trying to find alternative sources to keep the agricultural growth going. And so in a nutshell, a very big nutshell, that is basically what my office does. And we work obviously very closely with the water utility. And as I mentioned, because of the fact that we have to work on the different sectors, so we have a great relationship with agriculture. We have to expand our outreach to tourism. I mentioned in the definition ecosystems, because they have their value. Sometimes we tend to, under stressful situation, take water away from those these ecosystems to satisfy our domestic needs. And sometimes that ends up being a situation. So the balance of water use is really the resource management unit. So we have a number of things that we are trying to do as we work with utilities. Right now, for example, if I go back to the situation with the rationing on Nevis, again, and I need everybody to understand when it comes to the water supply, I think a number of times we have made comparisons set to electricity. And in the electricity business, their generation system tends to be in one location. Nevis, we have 18 wells spread around the entire island, from depths of 150 down to 400, 500 feet. So there's a whole structure of mechanisms that just has to be managed island-wide in order for us to keep up with the demand of water. And then, of course, there are mechanical issues as exacerbated our situation recently. So 2 wells went down in 1 week in Nevis. Guys were quick back up, but demand and the supply is so close that any removal of any supply, so those are some of the things that we do realize that, and I use the word waste. We are wasting the water based on the consumption, based on calculations of our population. See that the consumption is very excessive. So continue to do educational outreach. I think right now is probably the best time since we have got the attention of most circumstances that have been created, that we are trying to educate our populace to change their habits. The one thing I want to reiterate is that this whole driver of climate change is here and is here to stay. And so we have got to, must absolutely start to look at the behavioral patterns in trying to deal with the situation. Stop thinking that the water utilities are ultimately responsible for all provision of water, because it's just not true. It has to be a community-wide, a nationwide effort in issues like this. I stop there for now, so thank you. Actually, Ms. Williams, yes.
Thank you, Mr. Robinson. Thank you for that presentation. And you mentioned something which is very important, that the demand for water has increased because we have a lot of buildings and going up. And so therefore we have more people that are in need of water. They're in need of that very crucial in infrastructure. And at the very same time, supply has decreased and continues to decrease because of climate change and of course, in the drought conditions that we are having now. So we are in a very serious place in terms of water security, water management, and we have to find ways of how we can remedy this very, very chronic problem that the Federation faces, because water is life. And without water, there is nothing, right? Without water, there is no life, if you want to put it that way. So we have to come up with innovative ways of how we can, the speaker before you, the presenter before you, spoke about conserving water, water conservation. But we also have to come up with ways of finding water to provide for our people. Okay. So thank you very much for that enlightening presentation, if you don't have anything else to say.
I do have a ton, but I yield for now. Thank you.
Okay, right. Thank you very much. We are going to move on to our next presenter, who is Mr. Randy Elliott. And Mr. Elliott is the Director of the Department of Agriculture. And of course, agriculture is impacted agriculture is one of those, industries that needs water. Plants need water. Livestock needs water. And without it, agriculture is in big problems. Mr. Elliott, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, one and all. And I must say, thank you for having the Department of Agriculture here this afternoon, taking part in this meaningful discussion. It's a discussion that we deem that is very timely because it specifically touches drought. And as you rightfully said, Mr. James, it's a topic, and what it speaks of is in terms of water is like gold to the sector of agriculture. For us here in Nevis, when one speak of drought, we speak of when...
Did you say Mr. James? Did you say Mr. James?
Sorry. Yes, sorry.
Mr. Williams.
Sorry. And when we speak of drought, we speak of the point where moisture is no longer available to sustain life as it relates to plant life. Maybe whether within vegetable production or maybe within the open fields where moisture is needed for grass, etc., for our livestock. The drought within itself has affected us negatively over the years. And basically, we would have seen, like, for instance, a decrease in terms of production, especially during this time of the year, where you have farmers, and this is just not commercial farmers, you have even the persons who do the little backyard garden who refuse to, at this point in time, to attempt production. You also have these situations of the livestock farmers at this point in time who actually suffer. Some will even attempt to move the animals to the abattoir. They realize that while you're slaughtering a goat or sheep and they're looking for 30, 35 pounds, they're actually getting like 25, 20 pounds. So they're actually seeing a loss as it relates to the weight of their animals. But for us here in Nevis, the question is, what have we been doing here in the island of Nevis to see how can we curtail the effects of drought in the agricultural sector? And in Nevis, unlike many other territories, our farms, basically 99% of our farmers depend on domestic water. So when you have the rationing of water, etc., it actually affects our farmers because we all depend on the domestic water supply. But on the island of Nevis, we have been doing a number of things as it relates to trying to encourage our farmers practices that they can do to help to reduce wastage, but also to conserve and to prolong crop life. And some of the things that we would have ensured here in the island of Nevis is farmers is always abreast in terms of the technology of drip irrigation, where it is a requirement. It is once someone comes to the department and indicate that they wish to get into agriculture, that is one of the number one things we always tell them. You have to get drip irrigation. You don't want to see somebody even within the backyard with a hose, watering, etc., because it's actually wastage. And you've heard Mr. Robinson speak of the depletion of the water reservoir that's on the ground within itself. We also would have spoke to our farmers as it relates to the introduction of timers. Over the years, we have seen some farmers, while they use drip irrigation, they still prolong the watering time, etc. So we would have asked our farmers to start to implement some level of technology as it relates to timers and so forth, where now you're able to water your plants more specifically. We have also reached out to some of our livestock farmers as it relates to trying to develop pastures within your farms. You can't have your animals grazing, like wildly walking. Sometimes your animal will probably walking a mile looking for grass, but try to cultivate grass so your animals have access to grass. And we say cultivation in terms of using some of the same technology that we use within crops to see how can the livestock farmers benefit. We continue to support our farmers. We continue to with the introduction of greenhouse technology as it relates to, and it's a technology that utilizes a little less water than the open field because you don't have that high evapotranspiration rate. And also we have asked a number of our farmers to get involved in water storage on-farm water storage. It is something that we think that our farmers need to get back to some level of basics. I remember as a child growing up, when you see some of the farms, you see a little drum with a spout in just to catch rain. And we'd have asked some of our farmers to construct sheds on your farms and build something where you could actually capture some water to save your crops. We have also worked with our farmers and along with some lending institutes and funding agencies, along with some of our ally agencies such as ICA, CADI, FAO, and Republic of China and Taiwan as it relates to the proper usage of cover crops during the time of drought. So therefore, you leave the soil a little less exposed. And not just cover crop, but also the usage of matting or mulch, maybe whether it's grass, whether it be it's actually that black mulch material, that within itself again, sometimes aid our farmers as it relates to the preservation of water on farm. We, as it relates to our livestock farmers, we would have reached out to some of our livestock farmers and asked that rather than waiting until the drought hits you severe, where your animals started to lose weight, try to bring your numbers, your farm numbers within a range that you could appropriately manage them during the period of a drought. Over the years, and I'm sure even you in Sinkets, you would have seen that during drought, you would have heard farmers crying out for pests and diseases, and particularly monkeys. And one of the things that we find during the period of drought, the on-farm damages, or even the damages within the households from monkeys significantly increased during the period of drought. And as a result, because of a limitation of forage foods that are out in the wild, these animals tend to find themselves towards the farm of individuals. You would have seen an increase in terms of pests, diseases. Sometimes you go and you see some farmers, the plants looking really good. You come back, you see them looking wilt up with spider mites, etc. And all of these are factors that actually affecting the farming sector as a result of drought. The question is, what more can be done? What more can we do as it relates to trying to survive or trying to mitigate the effects of drought on the farming sector? And one of the things that we just have to continue to educate our farmers and the general public. We just have to continue to implement measures as it relates to water preservation and conservation on farm, water harvesting on farm, because we believe that once each farm takes that responsibility of protecting their investment, there can be some significant improvement that can be seen. And as you would have rightfully said, the sector is growing and there's a demand for food. And if the sector is growing and there's a demand for food, basically signifies there's a great demand for water also. And I'll stay there at this point in time. Thank you.
Okay, while we wait for Mr. Lesrod, I just want to pull our attention that the media houses will ask few questions, which will be coordinated by Mr. Lesroy Williams. And Von Radio, I could see Jarvis Brown, you're welcome. So I see Mr. Lesroy is back.
Right, thank you very much, Jack. I was thanking Mr. Randy Elliott, the director of the Department of Agriculture over there in Nevis, for his very insightful presentation. And we had three very impactful presentations today talking about the seriousness of our water and water security and water management, and how we can implement measures to deal with water conservation and other ways in which we can be water secure. So thanks to all the presentations, presenters, Mr. Robinson, Mr. Elliott, and Mr. Dixon. We now come to the question and answer segment. I see Mr. Jarvis Brown from Von Radio, and I do not know who else is going to ask questions. But Mr. Brown, do you have any questions? Mr. Brown, are you there?
Just a reminder of the minister's remarks.
Yes, is he ready to give those now?
Yes, it is virtual. It's already produced, and it's just for it to be played.
So he's now ready. He's now ready. Mr. Ngumba?
Okay, Mr. John James will be the one to confirm if the video could be played.
Mr. James, is the video ready to be played of the Honorable Spencer Brand?
Unfortunately, no. We're having a slight technical issue with this.
Okay. So for the time being, we are going to continue with the question and answer session. Now, Mr. Elliott, it is my understanding that the people in Nevis build with cisterns. Is that correct?
Yes, it's a requirement in some of this, in some of the areas where persons are required to put cistern as part of their homes. There's a requirement in some areas.
Mr. Elliott, I can't hear you.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
I can hear you loud and clear now.
Sorry, yes, as I indicated, it's a requirement for housing with a general requirement throughout the island as yet, but in some areas you have to construct with a system.
Okay, right, so it's a part of the law? Is it a part of the law in Nevis?
I'm not 100% sure if it's a part of the law, but I know there, as I said, in particular areas, once you're pursuing to construct, that is one of the requirements.
Okay. So that is one of the measures in terms of how we can harvest the rainwater for use by really having cisterns. That's one of the ways. But of course, if you're getting less rainfall, it simply means as well that you're going to have less water to harvest. So we still have a problem. But cisterns, I think, are a way to go when people build so that they can have that rainwater harvested for personal use. Mr. Brown, are you there? Okay, Mr. Brown has a question that he posed in the chat. As it relates to desalination, where is St. Kitts and Nevis with that? Is it a viable option? Does anyone want to attempt to answer that question? Any one of the presenters?
I could take a stab at that, Mr. Williams. Currently, there are two projects on both islands where we are trying to construct a solar-powered desal plant. It's just a small feasibility project, which would not make a dent. Will probably make a bigger dent in Nevis than it would in St. Kitts based on the size. I think 500,000 gallons per day. So we are looking not only at desal, but solar powered, because one of the things about desalination plants is that they consume a lot of energy, lots of electrical energy but of course, desalination has always been an option. 3/4 of this earth is covered with salt water. And so, but in addition to the electrical consumption, the high cost of electricity, there's also an ecological cost. And if we don't manage and monitor the brine that's produced from these plants properly, then we could go into some long-term problems with our near shore, even further apart, based on where the tides will take some of this brine that we put back. And so we are looking at those options right now on both islands. There's also a Green Climate Fund. There's a project that maybe the next couple of years that does have bigger plans for both islands. So the cost is probably the most prohibitive part of why we have not delved fully into desalination. And there's also, again, the whole environmental factor. And so short answer, yes, desal is being looked at this time.
Is there any other question?
And if I may, Mr. Williams.
Go right ahead, sir. Mr. Robinson.
When it comes to water management, I like to say that there's no silver bullet. There's no one answer to what we are going through right now. It has to be a combination of a number of things. So we have talked about rainwater harvesting on different levels, on the domestic level, the farmers, as Mr. Elliott mentioned. And we have groundwater, which we have to monitor that, because years ago, the theme for World Water Day was making the invisible visible, referring to groundwater. So there's a lot of effort that goes into keeping a tab on really where our groundwater supply is. Desalination is an option. Reuse is another big option that we have, recycling. And so some of these other things, before we get to the desal option, these other ones are much more affordable and much more sustainable in some cases, actually. And so as we are going forward, trying to find a solution to what we're going through as based on what climate change has caused, and not just, regionally, but globally, we have to now look at a multifaceted approach. And so the conservation, for example, I mean, I've seen documents that says that you could save more water from conservation than you could produce from, say, groundwater exploration. And that's a heavy statement. And as a matter of fact, Mr. Williams, when you gave a quick summary of what I said, I recall during COVID, our water consumption went up because of health reasons, but it wasn't, you didn't feel the pressure on the system because people use the water responsibly. You would wet your hands, turn off the water, soap up, and then just rinse, just use the water to rinse. And we didn't feel the kind of pressures we are feeling. And of course, during the time we had drought, we had dry period situations, So it is doable. And I think that obviously we have let our guards down as COVID is over. And yes, we had a good rainy season. And so, we feel like as if we have an abundance of water. And so we've gone back to some bad habits. So I want to reiterate that the efforts of conservation has to be a daily thing. Using a cup, brushing your teeth as opposed to having the water running. When you're taking your showers, wet your skin, you turn off the water, you soap up. And I hate to make it sound as basic as that, but that is the process that we have to go through because we are not aware of how much water we do waste when we're not using the water, but it's just running. I think Mr. Dixon made reference to that in his presentation. A lot of water is wasted when we're distracted by other things. And so we have to mechanically go through these processes until they become habitual for us. And I could almost guarantee you'll see the savings. Actually, this is what it is.
Okay, Mr. Robinson, thank you very much for that explanation. I was told that the desal plants are very costly to upkeep and to keep running. So I suppose that is where the solar power probably comes in. Am I correct there, Mr. Robinson?
That is correct. We are looking to see again the viability of that. These solar plants were sponsored by the UAE, United Emirates,
Arab Emirates.
Thank you very much. Yes, sir. And these are things that they use as a standard operation for them. And obviously, if it's been proven and practiced in one part of the world, then we're giving it a test this side of the world. And so we're looking to see, based on the information we've gotten from them, that they're just supposed to work, and so we give it a shot. But yes, the power part of the plant is really one of the biggest costs of operation. Like you're saying that, yes, the solar aspect, hopefully we can use that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Right. Are there any more questions, Mr. Jarvis Brown? Do you have any more questions? John, is the minister's presentation ready? John?
While waiting, I would also like to acknowledge the presence of Ms. Yolanda Weeks, who is also a journalist.
Yes, Ms. Weeks, Yolanda, thank you very much for joining this very informative session on drought awareness. You are very much aware of what is happening in the Federation with respect to the decrease in rainfall that we have been having. Do you have any questions that you want to ask WinFM? Yolanda?
Yeah, just one quick question. I know that in some parts of the world, there have been laws passed to bar individuals or domestic users from using water to do certain things. So I'm wondering if there have been any discussions about that or any consideration being given in that regard, because clearly there seems to be, you know, a serious problem with water wastage here in the country. And I'm not so, even though, you know, we would like it to stop, I'm not too sure that that will be the case. And that might, the route that we might end up have to take would be passing laws. So Mr. Robertson can probably comment on that.
There'll be lots of discussion about that. The appetite for passing laws to restrict water use is still, as you can imagine, social back on that. But we keep recommending stuff like that. And we have had lots of discussion about it. So the short answer is yes, there's been discussions, but to date, I don't think any action has been taken in that respect. We continue to focus on education, and I think part of the reasons why is that culturally we have been able to reach out to our citizens, you know, under circumstances and using encouragement and education to get behavioral changes. And we tend not to want to go to the legal system of that. But when you look at some of the developed countries, they already established stuff like that. So it's just a matter of time. So, but we have had discussions, yes, in that approach.
Okay, so recently, you can hear me, right? Yes. Recently, the Premier of NEMA spoke about the water situation, and he made a reference of the Four Seasons Resort and, you know, the booming tourism activity that's going on there still. The first thing that came to my head when I heard that is whether or not there have been discussions about Four Seasons having at least their own desalination plant.
Yes, I actually had discussion just last week, and to my surprise, there was actually a desalination plant at Four Seasons when it first was open. But because the water supply at the time in Nevis was so good, that was abandoned. So I think we have come in full circle where that's a discussion that has to be had. It is not an easy thing to do because based on where Four Seasons is located, you know, where would this plant be and the number of factors to be taken into consideration. But even before we get to that, Ms. Weeks, there's also the option of Four Seasons and rainwater harvesting. There's a number of buildings down there, including villas and stuff, and not all of them have catchments. And so I know they've been trying to do some stuff with just the storm runoff. That water has been recycled for irrigation of the golf course and stuff like that. So we still do have some opportunities that are still there before we get to the desal option. And again, we are trying to do this multi-approach, you know, and we're looking at all the aspects and feasibilities of doing all these things. Because for me personally, desal is really the last option for some of the reasons that was cited, cost and the environmental impact that it has. And so we are working on some intermediate stuff, intermediate items in terms of, again, stormwater. Another thing that we are doing, for example, a feasibility study has really in its infancy, but we're looking at what's called artificial recharge. And so when we do get heavy rainfall, and yes, under climate change, those are very rare, but you could dam a water course, and the water could be injected back into a known groundwater aquifer. So instead of that, the water just running off. I'm sorry. Instead of that water just running to the ocean, we have a way of capturing it and re-injecting it back into the groundwater supply. So those are some of the other things that we're working on to augment the situation that we're having, which again, also this is on the table. But discussion has begun about desalination for 4 seasons, but like I said, it's not an easy step based on a number of different factors.
Okay, so I don't know if before I came on, you spoke about cisterns and, you know, further development of the island as it relates to households and so on. More houses are going up. If how far y'all are with the conversation with the government about ensuring that within a plan, you must have a cistern?
That is something that's almost standard in this, actually. I think we've gotten a little loose over the years, again, with the water supply, that, and not that we're not building the system, but people are just not using the systems. So part of water resources mandate is back around, and we've been making some inroads trying to get folks to get their systems back in operation. And we're talking about some systems of the size of 10,000 gallons. And so even though we're not getting the kind of rainfall we're getting, and the rainfall comes in shorter bursts, but enough at sometimes fall for you to maintain your system levels. I have a couple of houses and a couple of residential areas that we are monitoring, and they've been running their systems for years now. You know, sometimes it gets low, depends on the length of the drought, but you can imagine that takes some load off of the water supply. And even if we have situations where it seems as if there's just a small number of these things around the island, Mr. Ennett made reference in farmers with a 55-gallon drum, when you do the math, it adds up. It adds up and it makes an impact. And so we have, I think in the planning ordinance, there is a guideline as to size of cistern for the size of houses. There's some areas in Nevis, for example, if you live at 1,000 feet or so, our system only supplies water for about 1,000 feet. If you're close to that contour, then you really can. So people who build houses in those areas have cisterns. We monitor them, and the cisterns ask them annually. There's sometimes, again, like I said, based on the prolonged drought, they may get low, and sometimes water has to be trucked to them. But the numbers show that it's a real big impact in terms of assisting the water utility in terms of supply, especially during times.
Okay, maybe one or two more questions. The drilling of wells. We've been hearing that talk for a long time about the drilling of wells. So how complicated, how complex it is, for the startup to the drilling of wells? Because I think we hear about it a lot, but you're not really seeing that come to fruition.
There are a number of steps that's involved. I think right now, for example, there's work being done, especially over in Nevis. I think there's some work being done on Sinkers also. But with the geothermal coming on stream, there's a certain amount of water. There's a large amount of water that's necessary for that the geothermal project. And so we are currently doing surveys and trying to assess whether or not we have water for that process. So when it comes to drilling, surveys has to be done. Some surveys, so-called resistivity and other surveys are done where you're able to get an idea of this. So that requires a certain time, not too long, but a couple of weeks, but it's costly. The more accurate approaches costs. That's before we drill. And then even when you drill, sometimes you don't get the amount of water that you need. So it's not a precise science. Number of wells may have to be adequate. There's also the situation that when you do drill and you get water, the quality may not be of what, and that's fun. So after spending that time drilling and the water comes up, then again, that water is no good. Might be able to be used for agriculture, but then again, what's happened when it comes, even when you're done drilling, infrastructure has to be put in place to take that water to where the consumers are. So there's a number of costs that's involved when you're doing this kind of stuff. So when the talk of drilling is going on and stuff, I think for small island states, our parliament, one of our biggest parliaments is funding. So something we have to go to CDB and different international agencies, and that doesn't take minutes either. And so when you look at the process, the entire process of getting to that point, in Nevis, for example, back in 2008, we did have a drilling expedition that gave us about 1 million gallons of water. That was back in 2008. Now, 1 million has been absorbed to the point that we're back at the deficit. And so, in having discussion about another drilling prospect, and the cost that I mentioned, I also mentioned the fact that the rainfall has depleted and the water table. So, do we have the kind of capacity in terms of underground storage that we had before? Because again, it's rain-fed. It's rain-fed. And so if there's no rain, then obviously it's going to deplete. When we did the drilling, some of the wells that we found, the temperature was as hot as the bad stream. It's kind of because of the volcanic activity in Nevis, you have a lot of contaminants, manganese, iron. We had to do a filtration system, additional cost, filter that water. That from some of these engineers that had high chemical nets. So I think to answer your question, the reason why you don't see it happening immediately because there are a number of factors that has to be put in place before we get to that final product. And I think that again, the lack of education to our public, when we do put something as we said, and we tip our hats and we say, yes, we have put 500,000 gallons in the system, people go, oh yes, we have water. And then the conservation part of it goes down the drain and we go back to wasting. One of the other things I want to add when it comes to consumption, car washes is something that is never a thing in our generation. They are abundant all over the place. And in some cases, nothing is put in place for them to recycle and reuse and for them to have their own, they want to have systems. They're strictly dependent relying on the utility. So a number of industries have come up that we have never dealt with before. We don't have any legislation or policies to deal with them. And it's hard to tell a man who's trying to do business, hey, you can't. So just allow it to happen and then we start scrambling, trying to find ways to it. But in terms of the drilling, those are a number of some of the steps that need to play. And that's why you probably don't see action as quickly as sometimes the talk indicates.
Thank you.
That's all your questions, Yolanda?
Hopefully.
Okay. Very good. I'm happy that you joined us and you were able to ask those very critical questions. Now, Mr. Brown, are you still there? Do you have any more questions? Apparently not. Mr. James, is the presentation sorted out?
No.
It is still not sorted out. Mr. Ngumba, what shall we do? Shall we bring this to a close? Shall we wait?
Okay, I think we could bring it to a close. The replay will have the video.
Okay, the replay will have the video. Okay, so of course we want to thank everyone who joined us today. We thank the media persons, Mr. Jarvis Brown from One Radio and Miss Yolanda Weeks from the Win FM. And we thank our presenters. We had Mr. Let me make sure that I get the names correctly. We had Mr. Floyd Robinson. Mr. Robinson, we thank you very much. Mr. Robinson is the director of the Integrated Water Resources Management in Nevis. We also had Mr. Randy Elliott, who is the director of the Department of Agriculture in Nevis, and Mr. Daniel Dixon, who is a Met officer at the RLB International Airport in St. Kitts. We thank all three of you for the very informative presentations that you gave. Additionally, we thank Zoe for introducing the bio of Mr. Dixon. And we thank, of course, Mr. Brian Dyer, the director of the Nevis Disaster Management Department. And we thank the organizer of these public awareness, these public education programs looking at comprehensive disaster management. The brainchild, I would say, of Mr. Jack Ngumba. Mr. Ngumba, you are doing a very good job of bringing awareness to the people, because without awareness, we are all in trouble. And especially now when we are having more disasters because of climate change, we're experiencing droughts, and we're experiencing, somebody mentioned in terms of the heat. We've had heat waves and so on, and how that is impacting on human life and animal life and plant life. And we are all feeling the effects of climate change. Some people say it is not real, but I can tell you that what we are feeling is real. And so we say a big thank you to you, Jack. Some people say Jacob, but I like to call you Jack. Right? So for the good work that you're doing at the Nevis Disaster Management Department, the Deputy Director. And of course, I want to thank Mr. John James, who does all the technical work behind the scene to make sure that these meetings are a success, that they come off. He organizes the Zoom and all of that. So Mr. James, thank you very much for the important work that you're doing. And this will be rebroadcast. It is on YouTube and so on. And for all those persons who are going to be looking at it, we want to thank you as well for participating in this information exercise, this communication and education on disaster awareness. Thank you to all of you. I am Les Roy Williams, and we will see you again for the next in the series of public education awareness programs. Jack, is there anything that you want to say? Our next one will be on what?
Thanks for the opportunity. Just a moment. Okay. Thanks for the opportunity. The next one is going to focus on hurricane, and that is much easier because culturally, the Federation is ready, in all capacity in terms of mind preparedness for a hurricane season. So hurricane will move from June to November. However, in between the months, we'll have excessive heat. I'm happy you're already talking about it, And Mr. Dyer did mention, we have excessive heat in the month of July. Hurricane will still be the overarching hazards. However, excessive heat takes over in July. Then in August, interestingly, we're going to have what we call coastal erosion. I think that is something where all the islands are susceptible to, yet we don't really bring it out as a key concern in terms of hazard awareness. Then in the month of September, that will be flood. So next month, it will be hurricane, and it will be much interesting because we'll talk about the various shelters and other key things that persons just need to go through the checklist to ensure they are right there and ready. So thanks for that opportunity again.
Thank you, and goodbye to all, and we would see you again. Take very good care of yourself and stay cool in this heat. Take care.